Ladies and gentlemen, wonderful to have you with us today. And today we're going to be looking at blended learning. I'm Stephen Cox, CEO of Osiris Educational. Delighted to be joined by Katie here, who's going to say a quick hi.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie and I'm the Client Relations Director at Osiris.
And then the star of the show today is Kim Wells, who's fresh out of the lesson, Kim. So we're keeping it very real today. Kim's works 4 days a week in a school, with the school as deputy head at Caterham School, and then works with Osiris for 1 day a week, which is fantastic to have him on board with us. And Kim's been looking at the models and what we can do within blended learning. I think it's worth saying that what we're looking at today is more of a hybrid learning model rather than just a pure blended model, but we're going to be looking at the whole thing, and we're going to be unpicking a bit of the research behind it. And I mean, the fascinating thing was Kim's school, they've delivered 23,200 lessons, I believe, through this kind of model, and they've been evaluating what's been working, how it can work better, and they've got a really smooth model. So we'll be sharing lessons from that, lessons from the research, and what you can do, particularly given that we seem to be going into a more difficult terrain now. So without more ado, Kim, hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Stephen. So I'm just going to pop up some slides for everyone, because I don't know about you, I'm a bit of a visual learner, so hopefully you still got us. So thanks so much, Stephen, for inviting me to lead this webinar, and thank you very much to everyone out there for joining us. I know how you feel, because it's a warm day, and most of you have been teaching as well, so we're all in the same boat. So just to sort of start with, lots of people stress about what blended learning means. They stress about what's the best model to use. I think what we've learned and what I've found out there is you just need a model, and you need clarity on that. You need a shared understanding of what you want. That will achieve collective efficacy, as John Hattie always talks about. So for me, blended learning, it draws on the strengths of different kinds of learning, face-to-face teaching, the virtual classroom, assessment, links, webinars, and it really is the way forward. You know, businesses, I was reading the other day, businesses, about 3/4 of businesses say they're going to basically use it for their training over the next 2 years. I had an email from St John's Ambulance yesterday saying, please join our blended learning seminar. In schools, well, you know, we probably advanced more in the last 6 months than in the preceding 6 years with the use of our tech. So I really feel now is the opportunity, now is the moment to seize. You know, we shouldn't just slip back into old habits. You know, we should harness the momentum we've got now. So I guess my question is, you know, what does blended mean in your school, or do you talk about distributed learning or M-learning or online learning? It doesn't matter as long as you have that shared understanding and vision of what it is that you're talking about. I mean, my school, we talk more about virtual learning and not remote, and that was very, very deliberate, because I think there's a big difference. So there we go. So that's my sort of broad definition of blended. I'm now going to pop up a poll, just so that we can get a feel for where all of you out there are with your blended learning. Stephen.
Fantastic. So while you just do that, Kim, can I just ask you if you can just go on the chat box? So Kim will take lessons. We'll take questions as we work our way through this. If they're very technical, we'll deal with those later on, if that makes sense. And Kim has got his assistant who's sitting inside, who's set all this up for them. So we're on to this. But if you can say where you're from, what school you're from, or which part of the world you're from, it always helps with the chat, gets people going, and then people can see what other people are thinking about. But we're going straight into the polls, if that's okay. And we're going to give you a poll while you're doing that. Let's do a little bit of.
It's like election night, isn't it, Stephen?
It is very interesting.
That's kind of what I hope to see, which is, you know, the majority of you out there, you know, probably 70% there, are well on the way with your blended learning. You're well on the way with hybrid, whatever you want to call it. That's really encouraging.
Especially given what we're going to be facing, yeah.
Absolutely. Who knows what's around the corner, really? Exactly. Okay, fantastic. Shall I press on?
Yeah, let's go.
So I guess there are problems and opportunities that are presented by moving between all those different ways of learning. For me, the key thing has been staff training. You can't just chuck devices at people, Stephen. I know a very sort of high achieving academic school near ours, which bought some iPads and really just threw them at their kids and their staff, because they thought, well, you know, they're intuitive and people will work out what to do with them, and it just didn't work. And in fact, they took them away again. You know, if you sow the seeds with devices, then you need to water those seeds regularly, and you need to have a plan. Our plan actually lasted 5 years, and we were lucky. It kind of led up to a year ago, so, you know, fortuitously in time, as it were. Best practice is great in training. You know, let your colleagues inspire each other. And in terms of the delivery of that training, I think it's really important to be creative with it. You know, model blended learning. You know, so think about delivering the training online as well as face-to-face. Think about the timings when you might do it. Make sure it's recorded so it can be asynchronous. We all know how hard it is to get any number of staff free at the same time.
So I know this might seem obvious, Kim, but how did you start at your school? And did you work out where teachers were at before you began it? What their preferred method was? You know, how did you engage the full staff? Because presumably you've got to take them on that journey.
So we started, as I said, sort of 5 years ago, and we started with literally 24 iPads in a classroom with my colleague, Deputy Head Innovation, and he would admit himself, you know, he taught some pretty shocking lessons amongst some decent ones in that first term or two. But this was all about, you've got to take risks, and you've got to be prepared to put yourselves out there a bit, and if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 poor lessons as a result of trying to do something new with technology, that's okay, because the end goal will be more than worth that risk that you're taking. The reward will outweigh that.
Okay, so these are your mission questions then, and just to let people know, what we're going to do is start with this, where the mission looks like, and then we're getting into lots of areas like the barriers that staff come across, understanding the problems and opportunities that sit around this. We're then looking at the models of digital, whether we're replacing learning and how we're replacing learning. We're then going to get right into how we integrate pedagogy within the content and the technology so it works together, and then from there, that planning stage, we're looking at the actual implementation and how we get that working, right through to assessment, feedback processes, so that one's all working together. And then what actually worked in practical terms for your, in the case of your school, Kim, and how you knew it was working, and then how you would regularly measure the impact of your model that you're using, because this is the crucial bit. And I think this is something John Hattie was saying very strongly. He was seeing an awful lot of busyness, so teachers really trying hard to do it, but it was just, well, how do we actually know whether this is working and carrying the impact? Because if we're just looking at the 25% of students, or, you know, very dangerously, when we're going to get a very mixed message then, yeah.
Absolutely, Stephen. I think it's really important, you know, as senior leaders, that we kind of describe a typical blended learning to staff. You know, obviously you need flexibility within that. Certainly in terms of frequency, you know, we're talking about go for this every day, every fortnight, or whatever. But how much face-to-face is desirable in a particular context? And I'm thinking, you know, for primary colleagues out there, maybe you would probably go for a higher percentage than with older kids. You know, what is your minimum expectation as a school for using online delivery of content? Those are really important things to get clear before you embark on any journey. And given that I think most of us are already somewhere along this journey, still really important checkpoints to take. But above all, you know, if I put one word on this slide over all those questions, it would be agile. You know, review and tweak it all the time. Even in the current scenario where we think, okay, well, we're into some sort of regular pattern at the moment for however long that is, you know, there are still lots of external factors in play, not just a virus, you know, but new technologies coming out. You know, we must be responsive, we must be adaptable. That's paramount. Yeah,
because I think what we were saying from the research, if you've got three elements that you've got obviously what's going on in the classroom, you've got what's going on online, and online really breaks down to what we're Zooming, if you like, where we're recreating more of a classroom, and the online programs like the Khan Academy, like the Oak Academy, and then the distance. And you're moving between all those three, and you can't help but move between those three because some things just don't teach well in one of those circumstances or another circumstance. And that's part of the agility that we're trying to get to. Yeah, but also I think the underpinning bit, which I really like about your school model, is the tutoring side. How do we do the pastoral side? Because if we ignore that, then it starts to fade. And then the tutoring side in terms of the academic development of the learner and how we're underpinning that, which becomes really important because their skills are getting stretched at the same time. And then also supporting the parents or whoever's in that situation of caring for those children. So it's quite a lot to pull together. And I think if you just dive onto one, the research is suggesting it will start to crumble very quickly. So we've got to keep all those in mind. Plus, if you're going to put tutoring on, it's got to be integrated to the teaching model, or the effect size is virtually zero. It works when it's part of the whole model. Yeah. Sorry, Kim, I'm still letting you thunder there.
No, spot on, Stephen. I mean, that's why we called it virtual school when we were in lockdown, not remote learning or anything, because it was a model of physical school. So pastoral was an essential part of that. So alongside our 23,000 odd lessons, there were twice a day touch points with tutors. There were well-being lessons. There was co-curricular clubs. There was even sport. Kids were given direction on what to do with sport, because you need to try and recreate. Should we go back into some kind of lockdown? Try and recreate the way those three stools of pastoral teaching and kind of outside the classroom stuff. They still hang together even when you're not physically in school. That's essential.
Cool.
Just sort of a few sort of other big questions to consider. We haven't got the time today to go through any of these in detail, but the one I just want to pick up on is the one at the bottom, because it's obviously absolutely essential that you get clear on what teaching and learning will look like under a blended classroom. But the one that everyone forgets is the kind of boring stuff, the bandwidth, the hardware that you have. Just to give an analogy, I don't know about you, if you've ever had to replace a boiler. It's really unsexy. You have nothing to show at the end of it, but you still have hot water in every room. And that's what you need to do. You need to spend quite a lot of money out of whatever your pot is, making sure the infrastructure is right. Otherwise, it's no point adding on all the bells and whistles later, because they just won't work properly. We're all used to seeing graphs, aren't we? Flattening the curve was a new word on me at the beginning of all this. So I think what's happened in the last 6 months is this graph has got compressed. The speed that we have moved through this graph has hugely accelerated. You're still not going to get everyone straight away, but I think the gap between the innovators and maybe the sort of late majority has really decreased, which is great, because we all know, trying to drive through, the senior leaders out there know, trying to drive through change, even when it's for the benefit of all, and particularly the student experience, is hard. And you need patience, and maybe more patience with technology than anything else. But just to echo what I said at the start, we are in a superb opportunity at the moment. This really is the chance of a lifetime to embed some really beneficial change by using tech in the classroom.
I guess the advantage is normally the late majority and the laggards. This is the technology adoption life cycle. And that's 45% of your staff. And that mirrors exactly what the polls were saying, that 50% of staff were ill equipped for this. They're going in a very early part of their learning curve. Now, if you're sitting in a normal CPD day saying, oh yeah, we're going to move to this and this is the system, these are the people who'll be sitting there going, I don't think it's going to change my practice much, or I'm already doing that. Whereas in this case, we can see really loud and clearly whether they can or whether they are. So the force of pace in that change is quite unbelievable.
Absolutely. And going back to your pastoral point, there's a kind of well-being pastoral issue with our staff as well, isn't there? There's something to manage there to ensure that we're aware of the change that they're having to adapt to very quickly. Coming back to physical school has been emotionally quite difficult for everyone as well. It is vaguely similar to what we had before, but a lot is different, and it's quite tiring being in school again. We know that. Can I just sort of share a model, Stephen, that I think is just brilliant? It's a sort of fantastic universal model for thinking of how you might use technology. We're getting now more into the sort of planning and implementation stage. So the SAMR model is all about four layers of impact of technology. But I guess I would say overreaching all of it is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You look at a model like this and you think straight away, okay, let's go for redefinition every time. But you don't build a rocket ship to Mars without knowing how to weld two bits of metal together first. Paper to OneNote is not difficult, but it's hugely practical and very impactful. And a lot of its impact is down at the substitution and maybe augmentation it. So the enhancement piece here down the bottom, those two, you would sort of summarize as what I do now, but tech allows me to do it slightly better. And then,
do you want to just say how you did that in your school? Because I'm aware that that pulling all the staff with you is quite difficult in this situation. So how did you overcome that?
Exactly. So you go for quick wins, and substitution augmentation might actually provide you with the quick wins, and they're slightly less, if intimidating is the right word, slightly less of a journey to take than maybe some of the modification redefinition stuff. So let's stick with OneNote. So OneNote versus analog. So substitution would be using a stylus, using an Apple Pen or whatever on OneNote. Augmentation would be using OneNote to insert pictures or additional documents to supplement your class notes. So none of those are difficult at all, but they are impactful. And then modification would be something like adding voice notes to your OneNote notes. And then redefinition, delivering your PowerPoint, putting it in the collaboration space, and then having pupils annotate and change them live during the lesson. That's transformational stuff. But once you present it to staff like that, even sort of drip feeding that, I would hope that isn't too intimidating. And certainly we found here, we started off going back to the journey sort of 5 years ago. So we started off with one teacher, one set of iPads, and then we had our sort of champions, of which we had about 10, so 10% of the staff. And then you obviously use your champions to just get the word out there that actually, hey, this is potentially transformational stuff, and actually it does make your life as a teacher easier, and it does drive pupil progress. And we also made sure that our staff knew how to use iPads before we started, throwing them at the kids as well, so that they didn't feel that horrible, generational gap that I might feel, oh wow, I don't know anything about tech. It wasn't around when I was your age. Well, you get that out the way fast.
So do you want to say a bit about the more innovative sides then? Because people say, yeah, they really like this model. We've explained how it works at the bottom end. What about, because you must see some crazy stuff being attempted, some of it which goes wrong. You said don't take as many risks as you want, and that's a great thing for you to be able to say because you've got a great deal of confidence. But how do you talk to the other colleagues in there who do want to take a risk, but they're kind of perhaps trying stuff which is technologically right at the front edge, but actually loses learning and teaching as kind of constructs behind them?
Well, I still come back, Stephen, to it. It's important to give staff permission to fail, and that would have been true at any point in my 16 years as Director of Learning and Teaching. That's not just driven by tech. You've got to take risks to get rewards. And we all go back to our own time at school, and we would have had some pretty dodgy lessons at times, and we would have had some lessons where our teachers tried some far out stuff, even though in the 80s there wasn't a lot of far out stuff. But I think as students sit there and they understand it, if you communicate with them, right, okay, we're going to try something new today. And I want your feedback. You make sure you have that feedback loop. Just because it doesn't work the first time doesn't mean you can't make it work or add value the second time. And we'll talk a bit later in the webinar about the importance of feedback and about tweaking things all the time. If I give I'll give a slightly more complicated example of Samir, but it's still, isn't something that is going to blow people away and make them think, okay, that's still way beyond what we could do. So the feedback, let's talk about feedback. So you can compress the feedback loop using SAMR. So substitution is using the stylus to change colors and highlighting. You do it a lot quicker than you could do doing analog, as it were. Augmentation, use stickers. Kids love stickers. Modification, give the feedback orally. Voice. Redefinition would be screencast, or even better, live marking a piece of work with a kid. Live mark with a pupil, whether you and them are in the same room or not. hugely powerful, very interactive, and you can even record that, and then before they do the next piece of work, you can say, okay, I want you to listen to what we did last time. So there's some sort of link between the feedback going forwards.
And redefinition?
So that would be, I think redefinition would be live marking with a kid, you know, online without having to be there or not, or doing a screencast. I quite like, you know, I teach modern languages, so we have essays at sixth form level. My standard way of marking an essay now is to mark it and record it and then ping it to my students. You know, they see me annotating and I'm talking over it and explaining the grammar or asking them questions to make it interactive, and then they'll make a little video and send it back to me so I know they've responded to it, or they'll write some comments at the bottom, or we'll start the next lesson with it. Or, you know, redefinition for me has been changing homework sometimes to say, right, your homework tonight, guys, is to join me online for a webinar for 20 minutes at 7:30, and we're going to talk about your homework there. And we're going to have a little discussion, take it outside the classroom, you know, a different way of flipping learning, as you were.
That's what we're talking about. You know, we are very constrained within the classroom itself, within these kind of hour and 10 blocks. And it's really nice to hear that there's different ways of working this one through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Lots of graphs today for the maths teachers. How do you plan for this? Well, yeah, the content and pedagogy has got to be really sound in your school, first of all. So I'm kind of, you know, assuming that any school listening, you've got teachers who know their subjects, and you've got teachers who've got a decent range of skills to deliver those subjects. So, you know, you focus your training on the tech side, and it needs to be chunked, you know, little bits, drip feed, little bits, particularly for those late adopters or those laggards, as it were. Individual pathways are important. So by that, I mean, each teacher needs a kind of choice to dip in and out of some of the training. Perhaps you obviously want a core, but also actually you are encouraging them to, as we were saying, you know, to explore and use the technology themselves. Now, you know, in secondary context, nobody is a subject specialist outside of their own subject. In a primary context, you know, not everyone is a key stage specialist. So it's important that you trust your teachers, and you provide that sort of, you know, permission again to do stuff. You know, that's an essential part of them playing around with the technology and getting good with it. But this is where the best practice comes in again. You know, you are going to have lots of success stories. You will have already had them during lockdown. Get your inset, you know, get some internal inset where you share that best practice. We had 2 insets like that during lockdown. In terms of feedback, they were off the scale. We've never had, you know, universal outstanding praise feedback for an inset, and that was led by staff for staff, and it was literally, you know, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. I've got 4 examples of it later on.
So thanks, Kim. So what you're saying there is, yeah, we can experiment with this through the training of staff as well as through working with the students. But I love this double feedback loop that's going, which technology enables, which is very difficult to do without kind of dominating with one person or 2 people with those conversations. And also that notion of best practice, because we know in live training it doesn't work quite so well, because you just get one glimpse of it, and some people are critiquing it, some people are judging it against their own practice. Some people are rejecting it just because someone used the word best, and other people are embracing it and saying, how can I take it on board? But once you start breaking it down, you can re-loop it, which this is all allowing. Then it gets a lot more exciting, and it becomes seen, and I think this is what you were saying, it's an iterative agile approach, as opposed to what was the old kind of waterfall approach where we analyze what we're doing, then bang, it comes down from above and gets spread out. This is kind of building up bit by bit, and no one's an expert, so therefore everyone seems to be a bit more open for the learning.
Absolutely, Steve. Absolutely, yeah. Implementation, you've got to get the core right. So, you know, you plan your training, but you need to be able to answer these sort of 5 critical questions. I just want to pick up on the homework one, because that is critical. You know, I'm sure everyone out there knows the research into homework. It's not hugely positive. I think the average effect size for homework is 0.28, and when you think that the average teacher intervention is 0.4, it's below average. And you think about the amount of time that's invested in setting homework, doing homework, parents cajoling kids to do homework and then us actually marking it as well. That's not a really good return on your investment. I just think blended learning, is a huge fillip for homework. We can really transform what homework is and make it impactful. Now, I should say that 0.28 is the average. If you look at it just at primary schools, it's way down, way below that. It almost has no positive impact whatsoever on average. So again, blended learning could be absolutely critical in transforming, how you implement your blended learning and getting your parents on side and seeing actual tangible results as a consequence of it.
So I guess what we're saying here is with blended, you've got a chance to practice the model, and homework is the perfect way to practice it. It's interesting when you delve right into the homework research, the effect in secondary school, particularly when you get to examination classes, is very strong with homework, but a lot of it is examination questions, and therefore it's deliberate practice of that scenario. Whereas in primary, it seems to try to be more creative, but in actual fact, it is, as you say, virtually zero effect and a lot of aggravation. Whereas if you do move to a different model, at least we're then building the learner and the learning capacity through it and preparing ourselves for whatever eventuality we need. Cool. So
flip learning, everyone knows what it means. It's knowledge going in outside the classroom, not needing the teacher present for the knowledge to be inputted, and then making that classroom time really precious, and being able to go stellar with what you do in lessons rather than just using it as the input device. And I guess the question is, how much new stuff goes in as part of homework? How much actual learning forms part of homework under a traditional model? And to flip that around, what is the opportunity we have now to change the nature of homework, or at least partially change the nature of homework, and how that's facilitated by blended learning. And the other thing I was going to mention at this point, which may not be relevant to many people listening in, but it just shows the transformational power of combining the best of teaching and the best of face-to-face with the best of technology. And that's cover lessons. We've come back into physical school and we've had the odd staff off already because they had to isolate, or because they've got to look after a sick child or whatever. And it's transformed what we've been able to do with people who are off work but not sick, off work but able to work. And I think that could be a huge impact on pupil progress going forwards as well. And that opportunity, if you are going to attend a course, whatever face-to-face course may ever exist again, but just to be able to pre-record content if you're not going to be in school, and then to have that as part of your blended lesson is potentially really powerful. Shall I talk a bit about feedback, Stephen?
Please do. I think this is the one thing above all that technology trumps a classroom on, isn't it? Would you say? And it's interesting because all the research shows that feedback, yes, everyone's doing it, they say they're doing it, is the most variable of every single teaching intervention that we can find. So if we can get it better, then this has got to be the way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. The sort of principles of feedback are, we all know that feedback's got to be actionable, it's got to be individualistic, it's got to be detailed, it's got to have a good blend of positives and negatives, it's got to be on time and so on. But tech can really bring something different to the party. So we're talking here about different kinds of feedback you can facilitate with tech. Everything from just the way you do traditional written comments and annotations, through to highlighting the rubric and linking it to performance criteria, but then getting into proper transformational stuff, which would be audio cast, screencast, video cast, virtual drop-ins, like what I was describing for my upper sixth homework, interactive self-reflection sheets. But there's something I think that blended learning brings for feedback, which is of paramount importance in terms of feedback landing, which is social presence. So there's a fantastic sort of learning lab at Surrey University who look into assessment and learning, and they talk about social presence quite a lot. That it's quite difficult to have that if the way you give feedback is purely writing a comment. And social presence is being effective, so being able to express mood or feelings. So for a virtual learner, for me to have things like a picture of my family behind me, I think I've got a picture of the England rugby team at the moment, but you know, having something show I'm a human being, it engages the student with the feedback a bit more. Being interactive, you know, showing the teacher is consciously part of the process, is present. Much harder with anonymous style feedback. Much easier if you can refer back to previous conversations and work, that you can ask questions whilst giving the feedback. That's all facilitated by some of those examples I gave just now. And then finally, go on, sorry, Steve.
I was going to say, the thing about feedback they say is the most important bit is, does the student want to act upon it? Are they ready and willing to act upon it? And I think this is the bit that helps in this loop, because you can see exactly that. I know we're just developing for this Cyrus Digital platform something called Exam Marker, which can be used in any context really. And literally you put 3 dots across the screen, that's it, bam, bam, bam. And then you get the student to unpick what they thought, why they think they've got a dot. You're not actually making any comments or any judgment whatsoever. And then as they start to unpick it, you can then walk into that conversation with them, because you know when they're online and you can click them online. But this is setting the homework up to be done at a certain time, and it's really neat, very effective, because they're taking the initiative in it, which is what what the dream is really. Sorry, Kim.
No, exactly. Yeah, we've got to key into kids' worlds, whether we like it or not. You know, every kid from pretty much from age 4 up to 18, their world revolves around interaction, and it revolves around technology. So we need to buy into that and use that as a force for good in how we give feedback. The other point I was going to make was variety is the key. You know, you talk to psychologists. You know, the more varied the feedback you give in terms of, you know, where it lands, when it lands, how it lands, the more likely they are to act on it and remember it. So a really easy question to ask your teachers is if I went into your class and I said, okay, how does Mr. Wells do feedback? And if every kid says the same thing, that might be a pointer to say, well, okay, you're not achieving that variety. And tech gives you that opportunity, like that example you just gave, Stephen, to just surprise kids. You know, almost have them anticipating the next bit of feedback. How's it going to come? What's it going to look like? You know, that anticipation alone would be hugely powerful in making that feedback land.
And I think I would add there, Kim, so we've got 2 bits there. How am I developing as a learner, as well as how fast is this learning going and this progress going, and having that kind of split screen on that and really breaking that down. It's hugely exciting. I think this is going to be one of the most exciting areas we go, because I know John has been doing some work on, John Hattie, sorry, has been doing some work on, we know collective efficacy is one of the huge, the number one now, if you like, but student collective efficacy, what could that look like then if they're doing it collectively? And you know, how much leverage can we get through the learning process there? So I think that's huge. Watch this space, and technology is something that will enable this fairly soon.
And we should mention peer-to-peer feedback there as well. You know, the way blended learning facilitates that kind of collaboration for feedback as well is really powerful. Okay, I'm just going to share some of our experience then. As Stephen mentioned at the start, we taught 23,200 lessons, I think we added up in lockdown. And we've done lots of analysis of it. But I'm just going to share with you actually what came out after just week 1 of lockdown. You remember back in March. So this was the result of a lot of conversations with students, but also a survey which we had pretty good response rate on. I'm in secondary, as you probably realised, year 7 through to year 13, 350 responses. And that was a summary on the left in black of what they said they liked and what for them worked. And there's definitely a theme that clearly jumps out here for me, which is about interaction. Not that they want loads of it, but they needed some of it, and they needed it at the right time and in the right way. So where we landed was, if you look on the right hand side, you're seeing green, three words, and that was that became our ideal blended lesson. That was what an atypical, virtual lesson would look like. So it would start with some sort of recorded content, mostly the teacher, but not always, never more than 5 minutes really. And then the opportunity to practice and work independently. And then at that point, we're using Google Meet. We're now on Teams. We used it for a plenary and that opportunity to explore how it all gone. And that model came out of those sort of 2,000 or so lessons that we taught in the first week. And it was quite different to probably the model we had at the beginning of that week. and that was, being agile, being responsive, being adaptable, because the kids are going to give you some great feedback.
Sorry, Kim, GM plenary, what do you mean by GM?
Sorry, Google Meet.
Google Meet, right, okay, so yeah. Nice, free resource, there it goes. And you've got the other ones down there. Do you want to just quickly talk through those, because they seem to, they'll work with a variety, but I love the simplicity of that. It could be a talker for the government and telling them how to put messages across, just 3 dead simple things there, yeah.
Well, they really liked having a teacher around. I guess, if you want to mock up what virtual school looks like compared to physical school, then you still have that option to email, or even better, if you are on Teams or Google Meet or Zoom or whatever, that they can get hold of you. Clear tasks and kind of, this is what we're going to do, a timetable for the lesson, was more important than ever virtually compared to being in the classroom. And we're finding that now, because we've most of our classes, there is a kid missing for whatever reason. And so that's remains really important now. Lots and lots of little tests. We do those anyway, but I think we did even more of them under the virtual environment, for engagement, but also for the students to self-assess where they were going. And really,
I think it's worth saying that on the research there, because it's so important, because what you're doing there, tests serve so many purposes, but the most crucial one for me is in that learning one, and it's just creating that reality perception gap in the user's brain, if you like, or whoever the pupil's brain, because then they want to close it. It creates the motivation by itself.
Absolutely, yeah. And OneNote, I mean, we've gone down the OneNote route. As I said at the start, I don't think it matters which model you use, as long as you pick it and you share that belief in it and you stick with it. We just love OneNote for that opportunity to collaborate. We found it just fantastic for enabling pair and group work. And again, going into the current socially distant classroom, it's been essential, because we can't do our normal stand up, move around, work with him, do this sort of stuff. That can't happen. So we're now doing it online in lessons.
So you're just saying 5 minutes there, Kim? 5 to 10 minutes, I'm guessing, yeah?
Yeah, that start. If you're talking about the starter thing, just 5-10 minutes, and we're still using it in lessons now. So we've got lots more teachers starting lots more lessons with okay, guys, let's watch this video together. Or if they've got devices, they watch it in their own time, and it's brilliant because it's individualized learning. So you've got some kids who literally watch it once and then they'll want to get on with something more difficult. You've obviously got some kids who want to pause and go back, and it's not necessarily related to ability, of course. And the teacher can, you're just watching them. You can see clearer than I've ever seen in a classroom, who's progressing where, who needs a bit of support, what kind of support.
So I know, and we know from the average in the research that teachers were teaching 89% of the time, I think was the last research study that came out. So to cut that down to 5 minutes involves some kind of clarity is going to be absolutely essential within that.
It's a great discipline, isn't it? Saying, how do I condense, what I want to get across to them into 5 minutes? And you can do it. You could do it in less if you needed to. Yeah,
I've seen it in Space Learning, and it was just amazing. And the results were just incredible from it. But then again, this is this 1 hour block causing us to work perhaps in a certain way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, the teacher isn't that sort of front and center, right? They are the input device for all the knowledge. It just breaks it up a bit. And it means they can watch it later. It means a kid who's off sick can watch it. Has all kinds of advantages.
And I think this is the way staff training is going to go as well, which would be interesting. Because in set day, because we have to keep all the children off for a day, was the way it was done. And then we squeezed it into twilights, because that's the free time when everyone's a bit tired and they've been had enough going on, or they've still got 78 things to solve. That isn't the ideal. The ideal may be something more like this that meets with our learning patterns.
Exactly. Having said that, please don't leave this webinar now because it's twilight and you're all tired out there. Exactly.
We've got 2 more things to come here.
Exactly. Yeah, we've got lots of things to come. Just to share the survey. So, that contact thing was so important for so many reasons, and that came out of student feedback. We didn't do enough contact in that first week. So I'm just going to share sort of 4 examples of things that we did in lockdown that we're now continuing with in our blended environment, and if we ever go back to virtual school, they're going to be present just again. But these things are here for good now. So live from Madrid was quite simply our languages department using native speakers contacts in different countries to drop into lessons. But what I loved about this one was it was for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It was never over-egged as, oh, let's have an hour of a native speaker. And what was also great was the use of the chat function. So, every social media conference device has a chat function like the one we're on at the moment. So the chat function was used really effectively. It enabled the pupils to interact with the speaker by asking questions or making comments if prompted by the teacher. But also it was brilliant for the teacher to offer up some help. So if there was a really technical bit of vocab that cropped up, instead of saying stop, it was just popped in the chat. And I saw that work so many times so well. Field trips are great. Come on. I mean, I don't want to stop geographers and biologists and early years teachers going out there and getting muddy. That's a really important part of education, but cost, risk assessments, time out of school and all that sort of stuff, I think not to replace it, but to augment it, to use the opportunity to, go into the Louvre for 5 minutes in an art lesson, to go around the Somme battlefield for 15 minutes whilst you're reading some First World War poetry is incredibly powerful. We had something called Family Philosophy Friday, which actually, since we've come back to physical school, we've had a lot of emails from parents saying, can we still do this? So we are. Basically, on any lesson on a Friday in philosophy and ethics, any parent could join in a lesson. So all those sort of bits of face-to-face teaching that we did virtually, all the stuff that was done as video, we strongly encouraged our parents to join in. And that was one of those risk-taker ones that could have gone egg on our face, but it didn't. It was quite the opposite. Parents engaged in the learning of their children and actually making some really interesting points, and actually hearing their kids say some wonderful stuff and understanding more about what they're doing in school. And then the last one is I think the one we're going to use possibly even more than any of the other three going forwards, which is, like all schools, we have this incredible body of expertise out there. Parents, former students who are doing some incredible things and know lots about what's in the curriculum. And to just have them, a bit like the Live from Madrid example, to have them to drop in. So I was watching a lesson last week and we had a former student who's now a doctor, and she's in the Healthcare Quality Improvement Partnership. So they're doing loads of research into cancer. So when we're studying cancer, when we're looking at cancer, GCSE and A-level bio, bring her in and she'll tell them all about the latest research. I think a great idea for primaries is get year 7s or 8s in your schools that you go into, get them online, get them to do some talks about transition with your year 6s or your year 5s. I think that could be really powerful, and it's in that lovely square of low effort, high impact, which is where every teacher wants to be as often as possible.
So Kim, a few questions coming in there. One was, so you saw what was working after a week. What was working after 6 weeks, and how did you know? Which leads us nicely into the evaluation questions. And what apps and programs were you using? All right, we're straight onto this one anyway. Yeah, cool. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of SurveyMonkey. It's just really, really user friendly, and you can use the free function, which gets you, I think, up to 100 uses, but you pay a bit of a subscription, and we're all over it all the time. I have a pupil focus group, and we have pupil focus groups in different year groups as well. Look, it's really hard to strip out blended learning from everything else and measure its impact on its own, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and do it. And yes, there's data, but I think the human element with blended learning is almost more important at the moment. So talk to your HODs, talk to your pupils, look at the work that's being produced under blended learning and put that alongside your data, whatever matters to you. So after 6 weeks, there weren't as many tweaks, but we were still in that loop of, let's do it. Let's ask for feedback. Let's measure how it's gone. Let's tweak it, and let's do it again slightly differently. And we keep doing that. And you just can never do that too much almost. And the students will, if you can create that culture in your school, then the students will offer it up without you asking them as well. It's quite normal here to, I don't want to blow trumpet at my own school, but it's quite normal here at the end of a lesson for a teacher to say, how was that for you? And for students to provide feedback, particularly at the moment, because we're trying so many new things all the time. But, that feedback, tweak it, do it a bit more, feedback, tweak it, do it a bit more. That proves, that keeps you agile, that keeps you responsive. we changed loads from March. We changed the lesson length. We changed the number of breaks that kids had and breaks between lessons. We changed the kind of, as you saw, the face-to-face versus independent learning ratio. And we also changed the amount of chunking we did. We realized that the virtual learning, you had to chunk your lessons even more. 10 minutes was too long for most year groups. And I'm talking secondary here. You needed boom, 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 boom to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I really like the lessons now, because obviously with the technology, you can show, look, here's the 3 parts of the lesson, and I can show you which part we're on, so they can watch that channeling moving through. I mean, I think another one in terms of the measuring the impact, that scale that you gave, the technology adoption scale. If your job is to be in charge of technology, your impact obviously has to be the engagement with it. It's good to know where all staff are on that scale and use that as your quiz base, and how you're moving each one of those, and be aware if they're at the far end of that scale and they've got a long journey. Exactly what you said, we're just using substitution here. Have I got them substituting? Because if I haven't got them there, I mean, I've been watching my daughter's lessons. Some of them are absolutely amazing, and it's just a beauty to watch the transformation, and the teachers working so well. Some of them are just absolutely awful, and they've got no idea, because there's no feedback loops operating in there. But, that's the nature of it.
And going back to staff, Stephen, in terms of those staff who might be late adopters or the late majority or laggards, sometimes they're fine. They're actually doing really well. And, I can think of a number of my colleagues who just need a lot of encouragement and sort of positive reinforcement for what they're doing. They are actually doing a lot better than they think they are with it.
And someone's just asking there about the feedback loops. Are these just for pupils? Are they two-way loops? Are they for staff as well? And what happens, I guess, when staff are feeling that, quite negative and overwhelmed by the whole thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So part of those staff insets that we did, we were able to build in, we used the chat function a bit like people are here, and we used polls and things a bit like we are today. So we're able to feed things into there as well. And those insets were done outside of normal inset days. And that's perpetuating now. We've got 4 Twilight internal run webinars, 30 to 45 minutes lined up for this term, and over a whole diversity of topics, but those topics have been kind of picked by the staff. They've said the first one is how to teach in the socially distant classroom, and the biggest concern is, how do I use those few minutes at the start of a lesson when I'm kind of setting up my, because we're obviously going to the kids at the moment, I have to set up my iPad, I have to get all my stuff out, blah blah blah. What do I do in those 3-4 minutes? And we're going to do an inset, half of which will just be on that. And that's from that feedback loop. That's from those staff sharing with us through various media. This is what we need to work on.
I'm guessing if there's one thing that comes out of this whole thing is that we become more evaluative in our processes, because I think that's one of the hardest things, because schools are so fast, so transactional in terms of the sheer amount of people you've got to interact with. To stop that moment and just get that evaluation, get a baseline of where you're trying to go and where you're moving to, but beautifully integrated here with the polls, because the polls are there to do it constantly for you. So make use. Kim, you've got a tremendous amount there. Have you got any last bits that you would say to the people out there before we sign off? Yeah, we have. It's
my last slide, Stephen, don't worry. I know what happens after 50 minutes with online learning, I know. Just sort of 5 final tips for me. I think we're not perfect, but if I look back and think what would have been the 5 most important things on our journey so far, it would be that. And just to clarify, don't build solutions around people. If you've got one person around whom this all hangs, what's going to happen if they leave? What's going to happen if Peristus thought they go under a bus? You don't want to be vulnerable like that. And then the last one, what will work in 5 years' time? Don't panic about that. You will future-proof yourself by being agile and responsive in the way we've described already. If you're constantly reviewing what you're doing, then you're going to be in a position to embrace whatever changes there will be, and there will be lots in the next 5 years.
Well, thanks so much, Kim. I think you've summarised it beautifully. It doesn't feel like it's a big panic. It feels like it's very doable, very biteable, and very workable with the staff. And, to say that your model's worked incredibly well at your school would be an understatement, I think.
Thank you, Stephen. Thanks.
According to the feedback, you've got the feedback, I read it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be looking at it as a model and saying, hey, look, have a look at this. Katie, you got any final thoughts?
No, not really. It's some really, really interesting points raised and a lot of questions that I am asked on a daily basis answered in this webinar. So thanks so much, Kim, and it's been really informative. And thanks to everyone for making the appointments, by the way. I look forward to speaking to you.
Yeah, and if you've got any other questions for Kim, just ping them through and we'll get some answers out and we'll send them out. This webinar will be made available from tomorrow. You can share it with other people or share the highlights and the bits that you like there. So thanks very much for joining us. Really appreciate that one. And take care. Have a really good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.